The sky above Outpost 7 burned orange and red. Smoke rose from 100 different fires. The ground shook every few seconds as bombs fell in the distance. Sergeant Daniel moved through the ruins with his rifle raised, his eyes scanning every shadow for movement. The war between humanity and the Dominion had been going on for 7 years, 7 long, bloody years. Daniel had been fighting for 5 of them. He had seen things that would give most people nightmares for the rest of their lives. He had lost friends. He had killed enemies. He had learned to hate them with every part of his soul. There were tall creatures with silver skin and 4 arms. Their eyes were large and violet, and they moved with a grace that seemed almost unnatural. They were strong, fast, and deadly. And for 7 years they had been trying to wipe humanity from the stars. Daniel's squad had been ordered to clear the remains of a supply depot. The main fighting had moved on hours ago, pushing deeper into enemy territory. What was left behind was just smoke, rubble, and bodies. "Keep moving," Daniel said to the 4 soldiers behind him. "We clear this sector, then we fall back to base." Private Moore nodded and moved to the left. Corporal Lisa Grant took the right. The others spread out in a standard search pattern. They had done this 100 times before. It was routine. It was boring. It was supposed to be safe. Daniel climbed over a pile of broken metal and stone. The supply depot had been hit hard by orbital strikes. Most of the buildings were nothing but rubble now. The air smelled like burning plastic and something else. Something sweet and wrong, the smell of blood. He found several bodies as he searched. All of them were soldiers. All of them were dead. He felt nothing when he looked at them. The war had taken his ability to feel sorry for the enemy a long time ago. Daniel was about to call the all clear when he heard something. It was a small sound, almost lost in the crackling of nearby fires. A high, thin cry, like a wounded animal or a child. He stopped moving. He listened. The sound came again. It was coming from beneath a collapsed support beam about 20 meters ahead. Daniel moved toward it slowly, his rifle still raised. It could be a trap. They were known for their tricks. When he reached the collapsed beam, he looked down through a gap in the rubble. What he saw made him freeze. It was a child. She was tiny, no bigger than a human toddler. Her silver skin was covered in ash and dried blood. Her 4 small arms were wrapped around herself, and she was shaking. Her large violet eyes looked up at Daniel with pure terror. For a long moment, Daniel just stared. He had never seen a child before. He had never even thought about them having children. In his mind, they were just enemies, just targets, just things to kill before they killed him. But this was not a soldier. This was not a threat. This was just a scared little girl trapped in the rubble, probably crying for a mother who was already dead. "Sarge's voice came from behind him. "What did you find?" Daniel did not answer right away. He was still looking at the child. She stared back at him, her body shaking harder now. She expected him to kill her. He could see it in her eyes. "It's nothing," Daniel said, "just rubble." He started to turn away. That was the smart thing to do. That was what a good soldier would do. They were the enemy. Their children would grow up to be soldiers who killed humans. Leaving her here was not murder. It was just war. But he could not do it. Daniel stopped. He closed his eyes and let out a long breath. Then he turned back to the rubble. "Sarge, we need to keep moving," Lisa said. She had come up behind. "Command wants us back in 30 minutes. "Then go," Daniel said. "I'll catch up." Lisa looked at the rubble. She looked at Daniel. Her eyes went wide when she heard the child cry again. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked. "It's a kid," Daniel said. "She's trapped." Raised his rifle. "We should put it down. One less enemy to worry about later." Something hot and angry flared in Daniel's chest. He stepped between and the rubble. His hand moved to his sidearm. "You shoot that child and I'll shoot you," Daniel said. His voice was calm and cold. "That's a promise." stared at him like he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. Daniel was not sure anymore. "She's the enemy," Sarge said. "She's a child," Daniel replied. "She's not the enemy, she's not anything yet, she's just a scared kid who needs help." Lisa put her hand on his rifle and pushed it down. "He's right, we're not here to kill bobbies, that's not what we do." Looked like he wanted to argue, but he said nothing. He just shook his head and stepped back. Daniel turned back to the rubble. The child was still watching him, still shaking, still waiting to die. "It's okay," Daniel said softly. He did not know if she could understand him. He did not know if children even understood language at this age, but he spoke anyway. "I'm not going to hurt you, I'm going to help you." He set his rifle down and began to dig. The rubble was heavy and his hands were soon bleeding from the sharp edges of broken metal, but he kept digging. He could hear Lisa helping him. Stood watch, his face angry but his rifle silent. It took almost 20 minutes to free the child. When Daniel finally pulled her from the rubble, she screamed and tried to fight him with her tiny 4 arms. But she was weak. She was hurt. After a few seconds, she stopped fighting and just cried. Daniel held her against his chest. He could feel her hearts beating fast. 2 hearts. They had 2 hearts. He had learned that from killing them. Now he was learning it from holding one. "It's okay," he said again. "You're safe now, I've got you." He did not know what he was going to do next. He could not take her back to base. Command would never allow it. They would probably have her killed. Or worse, they would study her like some kind of animal. But he could not leave her here either. She was hurt. She was alone. She would die without help. So Daniel made a choice. He sat down in the rubble with the child in his arms and he waited. He did not know what he was waiting for. Maybe death, maybe rescue, maybe something else entirely. Lisa sat down next to him. "You know we're probably going to get court-martialed for this." Daniel nodded, "Probably." "And you're okay with that?" He looked down at the child in his arms. She had stopped crying. She was looking up at him with those big violet eyes, and for the first time there was something other than fear in them. There was wonder. There was hope. "Yeah," Daniel said, "I'm okay with that." The fires kept burning around them. The war kept raging in the distance. But in that small corner of the battlefield, something had changed. Something important. Daniel had made a choice that would change everything. The hours passed slowly. The sun moved across the sky and the fires began to die down. Daniel stayed where he was, sitting in the rubble with the child in his arms. He had learned her name, or at least he thought he had. She had said something that sounded like when he pointed at her and asked who she was. She did not speak any human language, but she was smart. She understood his gestures and his tone. Was hurt worse than Daniel had first thought. She had a deep cut on one of her legs and burns on 2 of her arms. He had used strips from his own uniform to bandage her wounds. He had given her water from his canteen. She had been scared of it at first, but her thirst was stronger than her fear. Lisa had stayed with him, had left muttering about how Daniel had lost his mind. The other 2 soldiers had gone with. Daniel did not blame them. What he was doing was crazy. He knew that, but he could not make himself stop. "They're going to come looking for us," Lisa said. "Command is going to send a search party when we don't report back." "I know," Daniel said. "And when they find us with a kid, they're going to arrest us, or shoot us, probably both." "I know." Lisa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So why are we still here?" Daniel looked down at. She had fallen asleep against his chest. Her breathing was slow and steady. In sleep she looked almost peaceful, almost safe. "Because I can't leave her," Daniel said. "I know it doesn't make sense. I know she's the enemy. But look at her, Lisa. She's just a kid. She didn't start this war. She didn't kill anyone. She's just a little girl who lost everything and she's scared and alone." Lisa did not say anything. She just nodded slowly. They sat in silence for a while longer. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of red and purple. The temperature dropped. Daniel pulled closer to keep her warm. That was when they heard the ships. The sound of engines was different from human ships. It was deeper, more like a hum than a roar. Daniel looked up and saw 3 coming in from the east. They were moving fast, flying low over the ruined depot. "We need to run," Lisa said. She grabbed her rifle and started to stand. "No," Daniel said. "If we run, they'll shoot us in the back, and they'll kill her too." Lisa stared at him. "So what do we do?" Daniel stood up slowly, keeping in his arms. The child woke up and made a small sound of confusion. When she saw the ships, her eyes went wide with fear. "We stay," Daniel said. "We let them find us, and we hope they don't shoot first and ask questions later." It was not much of a plan, but it was all he had. They landed about 50 meters away. The doors opened and soldiers poured out. They were tall and silver and deadly. Their forearms held weapons that glowed with blue light. Their violet eyes scanned the ruins, searching for threats. When they saw Daniel and Lisa, they raised their weapons. Daniel did not move. He did not reach for his rifle. He just stood there, holding against his chest, waiting to see what would happen. One of the soldiers saw the child. She said something in her language, her voice sharp with surprise. The other soldiers looked at, and their weapons lowered just a little. A female stepped forward from the group. She was taller than the others, and her silver skin was marked with scars. Her armor was different too, more decorated, more important. This was their leader. She walked toward Daniel slowly, her violet eyes fixed on the child in his arms. When she was close enough to touch, she stopped and said something in. Daniel did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. She was asking a question. Answered, her small voice was scared but clear. She pointed at Daniel and said several things in rapid. The leader listened without moving. Her face showed no emotion. When finished speaking, the leader looked at Daniel. Her eyes were cold and hard. "You saved this child," she said. Her English was rough but understandable. "Why?" Daniel met her gaze. "Because she needed help." You are human. We are at war." "I know what we are," Daniel said. "But she's just a child. She didn't do anything wrong. I couldn't just leave her to die." The leader studied him for a long moment. Then she looked at and said something soft in. The child nodded and reached out toward the leader with 2 of her arms. The leader took her gently, cradling her against her chest. For a moment, Daniel thought it was over. He thought the leader would take the child and leave. Or maybe she would kill him and Lisa and then leave. Either way, he had done what he could. But the leader did not leave. Instead, she turned to her soldiers and gave a sharp command. 2 of them came forward and grabbed Daniel by the arms. 2 more grabbed Lisa. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked. He did not fight them. Fighting would only get him killed faster. "You are prisoners now," the leader said. "You will come with us." "And then what?" The leader looked at him with those cold, violet eyes. "Then we will decide what to do with you." They were taken to one of and pushed inside. The interior was dark and smelled like something Daniel could not name, something alien. The soldiers bound their hands with metal cuffs and made them sit against the wall. Lisa was pale and scared, but she did not cry. She just sat there, staring at nothing, probably thinking about everything she would never see again. Daniel watched. The leader had given her to another female soldier, who was tending to her wounds with medical supplies from a kit, kept looking over at Daniel. Every few minutes, she would say something in and point at him. The leader watched this with interest. The flight took about 2 hours. When they finally landed, Daniel was taken out and marched through a military base. It was big and clean and filled with soldiers who stared at him with hatred in their eyes. He was the enemy. He was the thing they had been fighting for 7 years. They put him in a cell. It was small and cold and had no windows. Lisa was taken somewhere else. He did not know where. For 3 days, no one came to see him. They gave him food and water through a slot in the door, but no one spoke to him. He sat in the darkness and waited. He thought about home. He thought about the war. He thought about and wondered if she was okay. On the fourth day, the door opened. Two guards came in and pulled Daniel to his feet. They marched him through the base to a large room filled with bright lights. In the center of the room was a chair with straps on the arms and legs. Daniel knew what was coming. He had been trained to resist interrogation, but training and reality were two different things. They strapped him to the chair and asked him questions. They asked about troop movements and battle plans and secret codes. Daniel told them nothing, so they hurt him. It went on for hours, maybe days. Daniel lost track of time. All he knew was pain and darkness and the sound of voices asking questions he would not answer. But through all of it, he kept thinking about. He kept thinking about the way she had looked at him with hope in her eyes. He kept thinking about the choice he had made on that burning battlefield. And somehow, that made the pain easier to bear. The interrogation stopped on the seventh day. Daniel did not know why. He was just grateful for the silence. His body was broken in more ways than he could count. His face was swollen and bruised. His ribs were cracked. His hands were burned from the devices they had used to hurt him. But he was alive, and he had not told them anything. He lay on the cold floor of his cell, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about the pain. He had given up hope of rescue. No human force was going to come this deep into territory. He was going to die here, alone and forgotten. Then the door opened. Daniel turned his head slowly, expecting another interrogation session. But instead of guards, he saw a single female standing in the doorway. She was tall and beautiful in a way that was hard to describe. Her silver skin seemed to glow in the dim light. Her violet eyes were sharp and intelligent. She wore robes of deep purple and gold, not armor, and she looked at Daniel like he was the most interesting thing she had ever seen. Behind her stood a dozen guards, all of them watching Daniel with weapons ready. The female stepped into the cell. Her movements were graceful and slow, like a predator that knew its prey could not escape. She stopped a few feet away from Daniel and looked down at him. "You are the human who saved the child," she said. Her voice was cold and clear, her English perfect. Daniel tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. He managed to push himself onto his elbows, and that was all. "Yeah," he said. His voice was rough from days of screaming. "That's me." The female studied him for a long moment. Her face showed nothing. No anger, no gratitude, nothing at all. "I am High Matriarch of House," she said. "The child you saved is my daughter." Daniel's mind was foggy from pain and exhaustion, but those words cut through the haze like a knife. This was Mother. This was one of the most powerful people in the Dominion, and she was standing in his cell, looking at him like she was trying to decide whether to thank him or kill him. "Is she okay?" Daniel asked. "Is she safe?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "You know her name." "She told me. At least I think she did. I don't speak." "No," said, "you do not. And yet she speaks your name constantly. She asks for you. She cries for you. She calls you her protector." Daniel did not know what to say to that. He had only spent a few hours with the child. He had just done what any decent person would do. He had not expected it to mean anything. Turned and spoke to one of her guards in rapid. The guard nodded and left the room. A moment later, he returned within his arms. The child's wounds had been treated properly now. Her silver skin was clean, and she wore a small dress of the same purple and gold as her mother's robes. But when she saw Daniel lying on the floor, her face crumpled with distress. She squirmed out of the guard's arms and ran to Daniel. She dropped to her knees beside him and wrapped all four of her small arms around his neck. She was crying and saying things in that Daniel could not understand. But he understood enough. He understood that this little girl had been waiting for him. She had been asking for him. She had not forgotten. Daniel put his arms around her as best he could. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm here, I'm okay." watched this with an expression that was finally showing something. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. She had not expected her daughter to react this way. "She should hate you," said quietly. "Your kind killed her father. Your bombs destroyed her home. Your soldiers have slaughtered our people for 7 years. And yet she runs to you like you are family." Daniel looked up at the matriarch. "I'm sorry about her father. I'm sorry about all of it, but I didn't do those things. I'm just a soldier. I follow orders and try to stay alive. That's all any of us do on either side. And yet, you disobeyed your orders to save my daughter." Saving a child isn't disobeying orders. It's being human. Was silent for a long moment. She looked at her daughter, still clinging to Daniel. She looked at the human soldier, broken and bleeding on the floor of a prison cell, and something changed in her eyes. "There is a custom among my people," she said slowly. "A very old custom. When one being saves another at great personal cost, especially a child of noble blood, the savior may be claimed as tribute." Daniel did not understand. Tribute. "It means you would become part of my household. You would be bound to house by honor. You would be protected, provided for. You would no longer be a prisoner of war. You would be," she paused, searching for the right word, "family." The word hung in the air between them. Daniel was sure he had heard wrong. This could not be real. A matriarch was not going to adopt a human soldier into her family just because he had saved her daughter. "I don't understand," Daniel said. "I am offering you a choice," said. "You can refuse and you will remain a prisoner. You will be interrogated until you break or die. That is the fate of all enemy soldiers. Or you can accept and you will come with me. You will live in my home. You will be treated with honor and respect, and my daughter will have her protector." Daniel looked at. She was still holding on to him, her face pressed against his chest. She did not understand what was being said, but she understood that something important was happening. "Why?" Daniel asked. "Why would you do this for me?" His expression softened just slightly. "Because my daughter is alive. Because you kept her warm when she was cold. Because you stood between her and danger when you could have walked away. Because she looks at you with love, and I have not seen her look at anyone that way since her father died." She stepped closer and knelt down so that her eyes were level with his. "Because perhaps this war has taken enough from both of us, and perhaps it is time for something different." Daniel thought about it. He thought about his home, far away across the stars. He thought about the war that showed no signs of ending. He thought about Lisa, who was probably still locked in a cell somewhere in this base. He thought about everything he would be leaving behind. Then he looked at. She pulled back and looked at him with those big violet eyes. She did not say anything. She just waited. Daniel made his choice. "I accept," he said. Nodded slowly. Then she stood and spoke a single word in. The word echoed through the cell like a thunderclap. "Tribute." The guards looked shocked. Some of them looked angry, but none of them moved. None of them argued. In culture, the word of a high matriarch was law. Reached down and took Daniel's hand. Her skin was cool and smooth against his. "Rise, Daniel," she said. "You are no longer a prisoner. You are no longer an enemy. From this day forward you belong to House, and may the stars guide us all to peace." Daniel rose. It hurt more than anything he had ever felt, but he stood. And for the first time in 7 years, he saw a future that was not filled with war. Life in House was nothing like Daniel had expected. He had imagined that being claimed as tribute would be another form of prison. A nicer prison, maybe. A prison with better food and softer beds, but still a prison. He was wrong. Gave him his own rooms in the eastern wing of her estate. The rooms were large and filled with light from tall windows that looked out over gardens of strange purple and blue flowers. There was a bed big enough for 3 humans, a private bathroom with running water, and closets full of clothing that had been adjusted to fit his smaller, 2-armed body. On his first morning, a servant came to help him dress. Daniel sent the servant away and dressed himself. He was not going to be waited on like some kind of lord. But getting used to the clothes was harder than he expected. Fabric was soft and smooth, almost like water against his skin. The colors were bright, mostly purples and golds, the colors of house. He felt ridiculous wearing them, like a child playing dress-up in his parents' clothes. Did not seem to think he looked ridiculous. When she saw him walking through the gardens that afternoon, she ran to him with a huge smile on her face. She grabbed his hand with two of her arms and pulled him along, chattering in rapid that he could not understand. Daniel let himself be pulled. He had nothing else to do, and the little girl's happiness was infectious. She showed him her favorite flowers and her favorite trees and a small pond where silver fish swam in lazy circles. She introduced him to the gardeners and the servants and anyone else they passed. None of them knew what to make of Daniel. He was human. He was the enemy. But he was also tribute to the matriarch, which made him untouchable. They bowed their heads when he passed and called him by a title that he did not understand. Their eyes showed confusion and anger and fear, but they did not show him disrespect. In the evening, Daniel was summoned to dinner with the matriarch. The dining hall of house was enormous. The ceiling was so high that Daniel could barely see it. The walls were covered in paintings and tapestries that showed scenes from history. The table was long enough to seat 50 people, but only 3 places were set. One for, and one for Daniel. Sat at the head of the table, watching Daniel as he entered. She was dressed in flowing robes of dark purple, and her silver skin glowed in the candlelight. She looked like a queen. She looked like a goddess. She looked like everything Daniel had been taught to fear and hate. He sat down in the chair that had been prepared for him. The seat was uncomfortable, designed for a body with 4 arms instead of 2, but he did not complain. "You look well," said, "better than you did in that cell." "I feel better," Daniel admitted. "Thank you for the rooms, for the clothes, for all of it. You are tribute, it is your right." Servants brought food. Most of it was strange to Daniel. The meat was from animals he had never seen. The vegetables were colors that did not exist on Earth, but he ate anyway. It was good. Different but good. Sat between them, eating with the happy carelessness of a child who did not understand the tension in the room. She kept looking at Daniel and smiling. She kept saying things in that made smile too. "She says you are not eating enough," translated. "She says you need to eat more so you can be strong enough to play with her tomorrow." Daniel looked at the little girl. "Tell her I'll try." The days turned into weeks. Daniel learned to navigate the estate without getting lost. He learned the names of the servants and the guards. He learned which gardens were open to him and which were private. He learned the rhythms of life in house. And slowly he learned the language. Was his teacher. Every day she would come to his rooms and point at things and say their names. Daniel would repeat the words until she was satisfied with his pronunciation. Then they would move on to the next thing. It was slow work. The language was complex, with sounds that human throats were not designed to make. But Daniel was determined. He wanted to understand what people were saying about him. He wanted to know what was telling her mother. He wanted to be more than just a strange curiosity in an alien house. After 3 months, he could hold simple conversations. After 6 months, he could read basic texts. After a year, he was almost fluent. Noticed his progress. She began inviting him to meetings with her advisors and counselors. He would sit quietly in the corner and listen, absorbing information about politics and culture. He learned about the different noble houses and their alliances. He learned about the war from the perspective. He learned things that made him question everything he had believed. They had not started the war. Not really. The first shots had been fired by a human colony ship that had mistaken a research vessel for a warship. They had responded with force, and the situation had escalated from there. 7 years later, neither side remembered exactly why they were fighting. They just knew that they had to keep fighting because stopping meant admitting that all the death had been for nothing. It was a waste, a terrible, senseless waste. Daniel began to speak up in meetings. At first, his comments were met with hostility. Who was this human to offer opinions on matters? But allowed it, and over time, the advisors began to listen. He offered insights into human military strategy. He explained how humans thought and what motivated them. He pointed out weaknesses in tactics that had cost them battles. Slowly, reluctantly, the counselors began to see him as an asset rather than an oddity. But not everyone in the Dominion was happy about Daniel's presence. One evening, a group of young nobles cornered him in the gardens. There were 5 of them, all male, all armed with ceremonial blades that were still sharp enough to kill. "You should not be here, human," the leader said. His name was, and his family had lost many warriors in the war. "You are a stain on this house. You are an insult to our people." Daniel faced them calmly. He had been a soldier for too long to show fear. "I am tribute to the matriarch. That is my right under your own laws." "Laws can be changed. Rights can be taken away," drew his blade. "All it takes is one accident, one human who fell down the stairs, one enemy who got what he deserved." The other nobles drew their blades too. Daniel had no weapon. He had not been allowed one since his capture. He was going to die here, in a beautiful garden surrounded by purple flowers, killed by the children of the people he had once fought against. Then a voice cut through the tension like a blade of its own. "Touch him and your house will burn." Stepped out of the shadows. She was not dressed in her usual robes. She was wearing armor, black and gold and terrifying. Her 4 arms held weapons that glowed with deadly light. And his friends went pale. They lowered their blades and backed away. Matriarch stammered, we did not mean." "Leave," said, "now, and pray that I do not tell your fathers what you attempted tonight." The young nobles fled. Turned to Daniel. Her eyes were hard, but there was something else there too. Concern, maybe, or something deeper. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No, thank you." She nodded slowly. "You are part of my house, Daniel. No one threatens what is mine." She turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone in the garden with the purple flowers and the silver moonlight. And for the first time since he had been taken prisoner, Daniel felt like he truly belonged somewhere. 2 years had passed since Daniel had been captured on the battlefield of Outpost 7. 2 years since he had saved a scared child from the rubble. 2 years since he had become tribute to House. The war was still going. Thousands were dying on both sides every month. Colonies were being destroyed. Ships were being blown apart in the cold darkness of space, and no one could see an end to it. Until made her move. She had been planning it for months, meeting in secret with other matriarchs who were tired of the bloodshed, gathering support from noble houses that had lost too much to continue fighting, building a coalition that was strong enough to challenge the War Council. Daniel had helped her. He had written letters to human commanders, explaining who he was and what had happened to him. He had provided intelligence about both sides, showing how the war was draining resources that neither species could afford to lose. He had become the bridge between 2 worlds that had forgotten how to talk to each other. Now the moment had arrived. The peace summit was held on a neutral station in the space between human and territory. Representatives from both sides gathered in a great hall that had been built specifically for this meeting. Humans on one side on the other, and a long table between them. Daniel stood behind's chair, dressed in the purple and gold of House. He could feel the eyes of the human delegation on him. They looked at him with confusion and suspicion. He was one of them, but he was wearing enemy colors. He was a traitor in their eyes, or maybe something else entirely. The talks began badly. Both sides had lists of grievances going back 7 years. Both sides blamed the other for starting the war. Both sides demanded concessions that the other side would never accept. The shouting started within the first hour. Daniel watched it all with a heavy heart. This was what he had feared. Both sides were too angry, too hurt, too proud to admit that peace was possible. They would rather keep fighting until there was nothing left to fight for. Then walked into the hall. She was 7 years old now, tall for her age, with the graceful movements of her people and the fierce intelligence of her mother. She walked straight to the center of the room and stood between the two delegations. Everyone fell silent. "I was there," said. Her voice was clear and strong. She spoke first then in English that Daniel had taught her over 2 years of patient lessons. "I was at 7. I was trapped under the ruins when the fighting stopped. I was scared and alone and hurt. I thought I was going to die." She turned to look at the human delegation. "And then a human soldier found me. He could have left me there. He could have killed me. His friends wanted him to, but he did not. He dug me out of the rubble with his bare hands. He bandaged my wounds with his own uniform. He gave me his water. He held me through the night and kept me warm." She turned to the side. "When my people found us, he stood between me and their weapons. He was ready to die to protect me. An enemy child. He did not see me as the enemy. He saw me as a child who needed help, and he helped me." Walked over to Daniel and took his hand. She pulled him forward into the center of the room where everyone could see them. "This is Daniel," she said. "He saved my life. He is my friend. He is my family. And if he can love me, if I can love him, then peace is possible. The war does not have to go on forever. We can choose something better." The room was completely silent. Daniel could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had not known was going to do this. He had not prepared any speech of his own. But as he looked around at the faces staring back at him, human and alike, he knew he had to say something. "I've been a soldier for most of my adult life," Daniel said. I've watched them kill my friends. I've hated them with everything I had. That's what war does. It teaches you to hate." He paused. But hate didn't save. Hate wouldn't have dug her out of that rubble. Hate couldn't have kept her warm through the night. Something else did. Something that I think both our species have, even if we've forgotten it. He looked at the human delegation. "I know you think I'm a traitor. Maybe I am. But I'm also a man who looked at a scared child and couldn't walk away. I think most of you would have done the same thing. I have to believe that. Because if that's not true, then what are we even fighting for?" He turned to "Your people took me prisoner. They hurt me. They could have killed me. But they didn't. Because one of your oldest traditions says that saving a life creates a bond that can't be broken. That tradition is beautiful. It's one of the most human things I've ever seen, even though it comes from a species that isn't human at all." Daniel took a deep breath. "We've been fighting for 7 years. We've lost count of the dead. And for what? A misunderstanding that happened before most of us were even involved. A mistake that nobody alive today is responsible for. We can keep killing each other until there's nothing left, or we can do something different. We can choose to be better." He squeezed his hand. "This little girl taught me that peace is possible. She taught me that the enemy doesn't have to be the enemy forever. She taught me that love doesn't care about the color of your skin or how many arms you have. If I can learn that, so can all of you." Daniel stepped back, pulling with him. He had said everything he could say. Now it was up to the people in the room to decide what came next. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Then the human admiral at the head of the table stood up. He was an old man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had fought in this war from the very beginning. He had lost 2 sons to weapons. He walked around the table to the side. The guards tensed, but raised a hand to stop them. The admiral stopped in front of and extended his hand. "I'm tired of burying my children," he said. "Let's end this." Looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she reached out with one of her own and took it. And just like that, the war was over. The treaty took 3 more months to finalize. There were details to work out, borders to draw, prisoners to exchange, reparations to discuss. But the hardest part was done. Both sides had agreed that peace was possible. Everything else was just paperwork. On the day the treaty was signed, stood beside Daniel in the great hall. She pressed her forehead against his in the gesture of deepest love and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for saving me, for all of it." Daniel smiled down at her. "You saved me too, you know. You reminded me what it means to be human." Appeared beside them. She looked at Daniel with something warm in her violet eyes, something that might have been pride, or maybe something more. "The historians will write about this day," she said. "They will write about how the war ended, about the treaty and the negotiations and the politics. But they will also write about you, Daniel, about a soldier who chose kindness over hatred, about a man who proved that enemies do not have to be enemies forever." Daniel shook his head. "I didn't do anything special. I just saw a kid who needed help." "No," said, "you did something extraordinary. You showed two species that peace was possible. You became the bridge between our worlds. That is not nothing. That is everything." She placed her hand on his shoulder. "You are not just tribute anymore, Daniel. You are family. You are friend. You are the future that we are building together." Daniel looked out at the hall full of humans and former enemies now working side by side to build something new. He looked at the little girl he had saved from the rubble, now standing tall and proud. He looked at the powerful matriarch who had given him a second chance at life. And for the first time in 7 long years, Daniel felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. He felt hope. The war that had lasted 7 years ended not with a final battle or a decisive victory, but with a choice made on a burning battlefield. A choice to save instead of destroy. A choice to love instead of hate. A choice to be human in the truest sense of the word. And that, the historians would later write, was how humanity proved its worth to the galaxy. Not through conquest or destruction, but through a single act of impossible kindness that changed everything. One soldier, one child, one choice. That was all it took to end a war.